We are learning the Maimer HaTzelem from Itzla Volozhiner, which is a comment or commentary that he wrote to the Nefesh HaChaim, and it was always published with the Nefesh HaChaim. Now they put it as like a separate piece between Shar Aleph and Shar Beis, and it's deep, and it's good to learn all of Nefesh HaChaim before you learn the Maimer HaTzelem, and that's what we did. We completed Baruch Hashem learning the Nefesh HaChaim, and so now we're learning the Maimer HaTzelem, which is based on the Kabbalah of the Arizal, and he's talked to us about the letters Tzadik, Lamed, and Mem, the gematrias of 90, 30, and 40. And he's been talking about the Dalid Yesoidos, that everything is made out of fire and wind and water. Those three are sort of the primary, and the one that's like the receptacle and they're acting upon is the earth, is Karka Oilam. And so that has to do with the Dalid Oisios of the Shem Havaya Baruch Hu, Yud Ke Vav Ke, because really there's only three letters. There's just Yud, He, and Vav. And the fourth letter is a repeat of the He again. So that last one is like we call it Malchus, and it's like a receptacle. So that corresponds to the earth, which we associate with Mother Earth. And I mentioned the concept of Esther Karka Oilam, of Esther in her relationship to Achashverosh is called Karka Oilam. And I'll just say now something that I found in a really interesting source. There's a non-Jewish professor who did really serious research on the Tanakh and counted psukim and counted words, and he finds these recurring structures. And so he's been talking about a recurring structure of 7, 3, and 1, where 7 and 3, of course, equal 10, corresponding to the 10 spheroids. And the 10 spheroids are very often divided into 3 and 7. The first 3 are called Gimel Rishonos, and the bottom 7 are called Zat, Zayin Tachtoinos, and that's the Chesed, Gura, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, Malchus. But the truth is, although there's not 11 spheroids, but their Das is sometimes in the mix, and also the whole 10 spheroids, sort of the last one is Malchus, which contains all the others. So he finds this construct, which is 7, 3, and then 1. And so, and again, he's finding it in the statements of God saying, let there be light and let there be trees and this and that. And he's counting psukim and words, let us create man and so forth. And he's talking about these recurring structures in Ma'aseh Bereshis and the Chumash. So it's fascinating to me, and it's sort of related to what we're talking about. Meanwhile, I'm ready to move on in the text. And so again, our Rebbe is now Rebbe HaTzelem Volozhin, who was Rosh Yeshiva in Yeshivas Volozhin that his father founded. And he says the following, Kol shinui tiv'ei, kol animtsoim sheba'olam, mitahoim ara, ad shmei maroim, hakol hu mishinui hitmazgut hadalid yesoidin. So they have this English translation. Every variation in the nature of everything in the world, from the depths of the earth to the skies above, everything is the effect of the variation of how the 4 elements combine, because they are the primeval roots. Now, this was sort of radical when he wrote this. Let's put it in, 1820 or something like that. But if you think about it today, where we have, the periodic table and we have atomic theory, we know that everything's made of the same stuff. And the only difference between, hydrogen and helium and oxygen and carbon and everything else, all the way to Einsteinium and berkelium and all that stuff, it's just like how many protons are in the nucleus and how many electrons are going about them, but it's all made of the same stuff. So this idea that all the things that exist in the whole world, from the bottom to the top, is made out of the same stuff. And again, he's sort of talking about spiritual stuff, but he's including physical stuff. The Daled Yesoidim is ultimately physical. It's earth, wind, and fire, as well as water. And so this rings, again, I don't claim that he's a scientist or that he's speaking in the name of modern science, I'm just showing parallels between this Kabbalistic approach, which stems from the Arizal, and the way we understand the modern world according to our scientific paradigm. Shehein hashrashim kadmaim, they're the primeval roots. Vehit mazgutam hein pnimius nefesh kol davar. So the way that they're intermixed with one another is what's going on in the inside of the soul of everything. Excuse me. Now, this is a chiddush of the Arizal, that there is a nefesh, even, not only, of course, people have nefesh, and we know there's nefesh of Ahamis, but the Arizal, and you might have admitted that there's a nefesh hatzomachat, which plants, let's say plants have a nefesh. The Arizal was mechadesh that in a sense there's even nefesh hadomem. So even inanimate objects like rocks, there's something that is sustaining them. There's an inner logic, or a raison d'etre, something that keeps a rock a rock. And for us, again, that's of course there is. Of course there's motion within the rock. And especially if you go to the stalactite cave, you see how the stalactites and the stalagmites are moving over time. But even the domain has a nefesh. And again, in the 1500s, when Arizal wrote it, that's a really radical idea, but it's for sure a true thing. So he's saying the way the four yesodos are intermixing with one another and affecting one another and interacting, that's what's going on in the inside. If we had, quote, an electron microscope that could see nefesh, ruach, and neshama, and the dal yesodos, we would see them, the heat mazgut in the nefesh of everything that exists. Ume'echus hitmazgutam b'pnimiyusam nimshach hevdelei pratim rabim b'chol dabar. So all the differences that we observe in the existence of everything, that stems from these inner differences in the way the Daled Yesodos are interacting with one another, the proportion and the dominance. Bitmunas mamasho, v'gavan mar'ito, b'doimimim, v'kein shinui hatzmachim b'ta'amam. It's the difference in the doimem, and it's the difference in the plants and how they taste and their medicinal properties. Tmunatam v'gavanam, how they look, their colors. V'chein shinui tiv'ei kol balei achayim. And that's the difference between all living creatures. And we today we know there's millions of different living creatures. There's single cell organisms, and there's reptiles, and there's fish and birds and mammals and all kinds of creatures. And they're all the same fundamental stuff is going on inside all of them. Tmunat evareya mar'isam v'tzurasam pu'ulasam mishtanois lefi hismazgus nafsham v'damam midalid marois. The inun hadalid yesoidin. So now we're back to sort of a medieval scientific approach where there's four marois. Okay, these are the four biles, or what do they call them? The four humors. That's the right word. The four humors. Thank you.
Term. Yeah.
The humors are four liquids found in various balances in the human body: black bile, yellow bile, green phlegm, and red blood. So we're right now really busy with green phlegm because of the flu. But we have also red blood, Baruch Hashem. We got some yellow bile, black bile. They call that the Mara Shchoira. I don't know if it has, an actual modern equivalent, what exactly that would be, but it's associated with depression. And of course, there are, there's liquids in our body, and there's a lot of, though, our nerves and our brain and stuff. There's hormones going, and there's enzymes, right? And so our body's in constant balance and sometimes disbalance, and that's what makes people sick and helps them get healthy or not. So, but this is like an ancient thing. This goes back to Aristotle, this idea of the four humors. And so again, you could compare it to modern understanding of health. There's some similarities and some differences. But for sure, the Kabbalah, like this is mentioned in the Zohar a little bit, And so here's Rabbi HaTzelem of Volozhiner, who's using the four maros, the Daled maros, these four humors, and describing like human behavior, whatever, based on it, and he's relating it to the four Yesoidos, which he related to the four Oisios of the Yud Kei Vav Kei. So my point is that even if we don't use this in the modern scientific model of health or anatomy, whatever, but it has meaning just partially because it was accepted for thousands of years, and the Zohar uses it, and the Kabbalah uses it, and there's a certain elegance to it, even if it's not a perfect description of the reality, but just the simplicity of it, that there's these four liquids and that they're interacting with one another, and a disbalance of them causes you to get sick, and it changes your personality. Like there's considered a phlegmatic personality, and I forgot all the terms for them, but it people who are sanguine, okay, and so forth. So again, it's an ancient model. It has some modern parallels, but for our purposes, we're really learning, Kabbalah and quasi Kabbalah and para Kabbalah and intra level to the Kabbalah. So it definitely has meaning in this usage. V'kol hitmazgut hadalid yisoidos nimshach mishlitat kochavim. Okay, another element, which is astrology, the impact and the influence of the stars. And when I say the stars here, of course, the stars include the moon, so it's and the sun. So it's not just the stars. It's all the heavenly bodies. The hitmazgut of the Dal Yesoidos is nimshach mishlitas hakochavim mesudarim b'mishmerosehem berakia k'mamaram zal ein lecha kol esev ba'aretz she'ein lo mazal berakia shemakeh ve'omer lo gadel. Okay, this is a beautiful idea that every blade of grass on earth has a spiritual controller in the heavens that strikes it and says to it, grow. Okay, this is a famous Maimer Chazal. And my wife has been talking a lot about it recently. Why does the angel have to hit the blade of grass? And the answer is, if you don't get hit, you don't grow. Okay? Growth is painful. Growth is somebody above you hitting you and saying to you, grow. Okay? So that's just like how the world works. In order to grow, you got to go through stuff. You have to survive stuff. You have to deal with stuff. You have to leave your comfort zone. If you're perfectly comfortable, you don't really grow. So these mazalot and kochavim in the heavens are interacting with the stuff down here on earth, the blades of grass or everything that exists, and they're striking it and saying, grow.
It's also
Yes.
in line, sort of, with Newtonian physics. I think it's Newtonian. Body at rest tends to stay at rest. Body in motion tends to stay in motion. So if the grass or the trees or whatever, they're just going to sit there. They've got to have something striking it to move it along.
Beautiful.
And
You got
they
it
stay in
set into
motion.
motion. Yeah, bad. But the kochavim that are striking the grass, they're also not the boss. They also have an overseer. They have a malach, b'shlichusam, and they're coming from the Dalid Chayos Samerkava. Okay, so we're seeing different levels here, parallel universes that are interacting with one another to move things along towards growth and an implementation of the divine will. Because guess where it all comes from? Hakol nimshach mishem havaya baruch hu. It's all coming from the Shem Hashem. It's all coming from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's coming from Yud Kei Vav Kei. Hakol nimshach mishem havaya baruch hu k'mevuar be'etz chayim be'arichus. This is coming from the Kisvei Arizal. It's called the Eitz Chaim. Hainu shekol adalid shroshim kadmoyim hein havaya achat. That all of the four primeval roots are a single Shem Havaya. Shiratzon Hashem Yisbarach Shmo. Haya livro kol ha'olam. Bizhavus Havaya kazu. Shebechol hametzius. Yimtzu koyach hadalid shroshim. It was Hashem's will to create the entire world in the form of Yud Kei Vav Kei in this way, so that all parts of existence would be found, the powers of the four roots. Just to give an example, like in biology and in genetics today, we know what we know about the double helix and the DNA and the RNA, and that there's just a few proteins, amino acids, that all of our genes are comprised of patterns of the amino acids. So you just have a few, they're abbreviated by letters, and the letters of the different amino acids that repeat themselves in the double helix through our genes. And so there's a really small number of variables, and that produce this incredible amount of complexity. And so you never meet two people that are identical, but you do meet people that are similar and that have certain similarities in their characteristics, because everybody comes from the same place. We all come from Adam. We were all created by God, HaTzelem Elokim. So Hashem used certain pathways, and everything goes up to the Shem Havaya, and it comes down through the Chayos and the Malachim and the Koichavim and the Mazalos, and those are ultimately striking, physical objects, the grasses, and they're affecting all of us in our behavior and our growth and our whole life pattern. Gam kol koichos ha'adam b'tiv'o v'netiyas sichlo v'netiyas ritzoynoi mishtanim lefi hishtanut mezeg daled shrashim delay. In the same way, all of man's natural powers, the inclination of his intellect, the inclination of his will, they vary based on the combination of, it says daled shrashim delay. I don't know why they wrote here 3 roots. It should be 4 roots. Kemuvuar in the Sfarim, is chayun tivius mimanan agufin the inun me arba yasoidin me inun dachyin ulekablayu arba chiyun dorsin misaven al dal maririn. Oh, now we got bad creatures. Mara chiyura, mara sumka, mara yeruka, mara uchma. These chayun sichlios the mischar the kursaya ve'isla eliminayu ve'gvoyim aleim. Wow. They are natural living beings appointed over bodies that are from the 4 elements, that are ritually pure, that are dachyin, is pure. And corresponding to them are 4 living beings that are spiritually impure. Arba chiyun dursin misavin. Misavin is Aramaic for tameim. I guess he translated carnivores for dorsin, an animal which is like an animal of prey, a predator. Okay, so, and I get think of a lion or an eagle, right? Those are predatory animals, and they're, you can't eat them. So in a sense, they're behemoth tamea or chaya tamea. But again, this is in the spiritual realm. I think there's 4 chayin predatory animals that are tameim, founded upon the 4 humors: white, red, green, and black. And these are living beings that surround the Kisei HaKavod, right? We know there's an eagle and a lion, there's a shore, and then there's a cherub or whatever. But here it's talking about 4 creatures that are Tmeim, and yet they're surrounding the Kisei HaKavod. And there are those who are above them and higher over them. So wow, we're at a really high place at the Kisei HaKavod and the Chayos HaKodesh, but there are forces of Tahara, but there are also forces of Tuma, predatory forces, some negative forces that are, killing others or dominating and destroying. And that explains a lot, about our world, where our world is very much dog eat dog and might makes right, and, kol da'olim gvar. That is mostly the world we live in, where the strong, dominate the weak. Okay. To me, it's fascinating stuff. I love this stuff. I think it's really, really interesting, and I'm really happy to share it with you. So thanks for being here. We'll table it here. We'll come back to it next week, Beth Hashem. Everybody should feel good. Have a good winter. We should start to see the rain fall in Israel.
Man.
Steve, you'll take the rain in the Golan and you'll send some downstream to the Kinneret and all the way down to us, please.
Shkach. Good
Shkoyach,
night.
shkoyach.
Colton, good night, everybody. Thanks.
Kol tuv.